It's a pleasure to be here. I must say I'm very impressed. We just got a little tour of the facility and the neural nets and so on, the brain imaging that you're going to be hearing about today, which is not something that I do. And I find it a little scary because I don't want my wife to find out that this technology exists, so she knows when I'm lying to her. Anyway, let me get started here and hope all the technology works. My area is consumer behavior, and I've been captivated a lot in recent years, as many of us have, by the changes in consumer behavior as the technology around us changes in ways both good and bad. One of the things I've noticed, though, that doesn't change, and that is that, and maybe this is because I'm starting to age a bit. I just turned 40 the other day, and you don't have to laugh too hard at that. But as my friends get older, they start to have grandchildren, and when I travel, people seem to want to come up to me and talk about their grandchildren, and everybody wants to show me pictures of their grandchildren and go on and on about that as if I'm slightly interested. Having said that, this is my granddaughter, Rose. The reason I'm starting off with Rose and introducing you to Rose, who's about 3 years old right now, is that Rose, much to the chagrin of my wife and myself, lives in Los Angeles with her parents. We live in Philadelphia. And so, as you might imagine, our opportunities to interact with her physically are relatively limited. My wife only spends about 50 weeks of the year out there right now. But we do have an ooh. Is that me, or I don't know what that is, but that'll wake you up. We do have an alternative, of course, and that is Skype. So we're able to, in addition to the physical visits that we can squeeze in, of course, we're able to Skype with Rose periodically, as many of you probably do. And it's interesting that Skype is one of those cutting-edge technologies that probably more grandparents have learned because they're motivated to communicate with their grandchildren than even young people are doing. And what interests me about this, as I think about it, is that when Rose sees my wife and me on the screen, and which she does frequently, I wonder, as she's growing up, to what extent she is able to distinguish the screen me from the real me. And as I think about that, I think about the distinction that we make, at least in my generation, between being online and offline. And I'm not a developmental psychologist, I'm a social psychologist by training, but my naive theory about this is that children today, in fact, do not make that distinction between being online and offline. That to them, it's pretty much a seamless pattern of moving back and forth repeatedly between what we think of as the online space and the offline or physical space. And so they don't really make that distinction. And I think when Rose gets to be a little older, if someone were to ask her the question, were you online today? I think she would look at that person kind of strangely because she's not really going to get that distinction. So, I don't know about you, but I just woke up. So we have now, I think for most of us, and again, anybody over the age of 15 at least, we think in terms of what I would call a digital dichotomy, where we make this distinction both in terms of our personal lives, but also in terms of business and marketing and talking to consumers. We make the distinction between the so-called real world and the digital world, as if these are two totally separate domains. And my basic argument that I want to share with you this morning is that that is an outmoded concept. So I want to talk about this fusing of these two domains to make the case that there is no longer such a thing as a digital dichotomy, and to talk a little bit about some of what I see are the ramifications of that, particularly for the world of marketers, especially people over the age of 15 who have to talk to people under the age of 15. many of the people I see in marketing today look to me as if they're about 15, but that's another story. So let's fuse these two together and move on. So we know that, of course, advertisers have had the ability for many, many years, I mean, pretty much as long as advertising in its modern form has been around, to play games with reality. In other words, to take images and doctor them in the laboratory, if you will, to, well, today we Photoshop them, but, you know, back in the day they would have other techniques to do that. So always advertisers have presented a vision of reality that is not necessarily corresponding to what's going on in the real world. So when I show an ad like this to my students, I'm a little worried that they believe, if they've never actually seen the real statue, that if they were to go to Italy to see this statue, he would in fact have a pair of Levi's jeans on him, you know, and maybe that's just American modesty, having to clothe David in this way. But it wouldn't surprise me. Now, one of the things that I see when I study consumers over the years, and I look at advertising, as many of you do, is that this kind of brand communication that we use, where we put brands out there, we put them all over the world in different places, what we tend to see is that steadily, just as I believe there is an erosion of this dichotomy between offline and online, there is an erosion of what used to be a dichotomy between the self and the products that I use. So one of my passions in terms of my research and what I see going on all the time is that, again, it's no longer really valid to make a distinction between the inner me and the brands that I use. I gave a talk in Tokyo a few years ago, and this young girl came up to me and she said, "I really enjoyed your talk, but I really need to know, what brand are you?" And I kind of looked at her, you know, well, I'm Mike, you know. She said, no, what brand are you? Now, if you know anything about the Japanese, you know, they tend to love luxury goods. And, you know, she wanted to know, am I Louis Vuitton? You know, who is the luxury brand that I really feel is a part of who I am? And of course, I can't afford most of those brands, so I'm the Kmart guy, I guess. I don't know. But what we see a lot in advertising, if you look for it, which I tend to do, is this fusion between the self and brand, so that basically, you know, we have these sayings in our culture, and most cultures the equivalent, you are what you wear, you are what you drive, you are what you eat, and so on. So we tend to see this fusion between the self and brand image, and brands marketers understanding that they can actually enlist consumers to become part of the brand. So we're not just selling to the consumer becomes a part of that brand. And I think we all know that the most successful brands, of course, everybody's talking about Apple this week due to the unfortunate death of Steve Jobs, but we know that Apple is more than just a computer brand. I mean, that's a cliche practically to say to anyone in this room, I'm sure. But why is that? It's because of the extent of identification and community that Apple has fostered between its technological products and this vast community of users.